What's the difference between a community and a beloved community? Our acting board president, Don Cooper, asked me in a meeting the other day. We're a great community here at Chalice, he said, but what makes a beloved community? What a wonderful question, I thought. We're all part of various communities, whether it's this congregation or your neighborhood or your friends and family or your football team or your school or college or your activist or political group. There's so many communities that we can be a part of. But what differentiates a beloved community from just a regular community? Last week, the King's Center's Beloved Community Global Summit that Randall mentioned earlier began by asking us to be love as the core tenet of a beloved community. Be love. The King Center went on, Dr. King's beloved community is a global vision in which all people can share in the wealth of the earth. In the beloved community, poverty, hunger, and homelessness will not be tolerated because international standards of human decency will not allow it. Racism and all forms of discrimination, bigotry, and prejudice will be replaced by an all-inclusive spirit of sisterhood and brotherhood. And I know that if MLK had lived today, he would have said personhood. The UUA Leadership Council describes beloved community as a place where all souls are welcomed as blessings, and the human family lives whole and reconciled. And in their book, Mistakes and Miracles, which our board and other members of Chalice are reading right now, Reverend Nancy Palmer-Jones and Karen Lynn share that in beloved community, people commit to helping create a community bursting with people from a diversity of theologies, philosophies, ethnicities, cultures, colors, classes, abilities, generations, sexual orientations, and political persuasions, all dwelling together in peace, seeking the truth in love, and helping one another. But I'm curious, when you hear the term beloved community, what does it mean to you? I invite you to take a moment for us to breathe together. And perhaps put your hand on your heart and maybe close your eyes and ask yourself, what would a community guided by love be like? Imagine if we were to treat one another as beloved, as the poet Rumi often talked about. What would that kind of community be like? What makes a beloved community? Take a moment and reflect on that, and then when you're ready, I invite you to click on the link in the chat and write down a quality or two about what you think makes beloved community. Excuse me. David is going to share our results in a word cloud, and if you can't, for whatever reason, click on the link, please just write your thoughts in the chat. But if you can click on the link, do click on it and put in what you think makes beloved community. And as you type words in, we will see them appear in our word cloud. I see humility, acceptance, beauty, generosity, empathy, kinship, non-judgment, sharing, trust, mercy. Oh my gosh, it's moving around so quick I can't read them all. Support, justice, equity, love, compassion, kindness, fearlessness, understanding, peace, generosity, patience, friendliness, mercy, togetherness, understanding, integrity, tolerance, openness, joy, commitment, mutuality, anti-racism, harmony, safety, benevolence, respect, And the words that are larger are words that that many of you have shared. So the words that are larger are the ones that most of you, or many of you, have voted for. Honor. Chalice. Kinship. Time. Welcoming. Safety. Appreciation. Forgiveness. So many in words. Engagement is another one that just came in. Engagement, softness. How beautiful. Thank you, my friends, for participating. And we're going to save our word cloud and post it on our Facebook and perhaps our website later so that you guys can see it again later and visit it. Thank you, David. So imagine this for beloved community, and you may close your eyes again if you wish. I want you to envision this with me. A world in which we respect everyone we meet. Everyone. Where we're kind to each other and assume the best of one another. Imagine a world where curiosity and care drives our interactions. A world in which we listen deeply to understand one another, in which humility is more important than being right. A world in which laughter and joy abound rather than fear and distrust. A world in which everyone's needs matter equally, in which everybody has a roof over their head, enough food on their table, and access to free health care. A world in which we emphasize dialogue over debate, generosity over greed, people over profits, kindness over cruelty. And we care as much about the other as we do for ourselves. Indeed, a world in which there is no other, because we seek to understand one another and be at peace with each other. A world in which we offer everyone's children as much love as we give our own. A world in which everyone wins. We don't do anything at the expense of another or our earth. A world in which we all thrive, regardless of gender, culture, class, wealth, ethnicity, sexual orientation, skin color, age, or ability. We all thrive. A world guided by love. Wouldn't you want to live in that world? Raise your hands like this if you'd like to live in a world like that. I know that I certainly would. So what do we need to do to create that kind of a world here in our Chalice community and in our local neighborhood? Because as we all know, change begins with us. We can't hope to change the world out there unless we're willing to transform ourselves first. And then by doing so, hopefully our families, our friends, and our communities will transform. The Beloved Community Summit emphasized that need to discover our own barriers to love. The need to discover our own barriers to love. Now you may be thinking, hey, I'm a pretty loving person already, Rev. And I'd probably say you are, indeed. But I know for me there's always more inner work needed to open my heart further to love, so I can effectively do the outer work. So what do you think you need to further open your heart to love? How do you melt a hardened or closed heart and open yourself to others more? And I invite you not to blame or shame yourself, because as souls on this earth, we inevitably take some hits as part of living. We've all been hurt or had our hearts broken, or both. And the instinct, of course, is to protect our hearts, to shield them from future pain. It's natural. But we can start the healing while the shields are in place and know that the transformation must continue. The shields can eventually fall away as we heal and allow ourselves to know love again and be love again. That's our purest state, to know and be love. I know for me, the healing involves doing more therapy to uncover my barriers to love, and doing a daily practice that connects me with compassion. A practice like metta meditation or prayer for others. And it also means becoming more aware of the judgments in my mind and reminding myself to let go of them and approach another with curiosity, openness, and humility. And of course, it's not once and done. These are daily, continuous endeavors, believe me. How about you? I invite you to consider your own barriers to love and what you might do to be more loving. My friends, if we work individually to open our hearts further, to dismantle our barriers to love, we're going to be more available to create beloved community right here. Now, don't get me wrong, this community is already extremely loving and caring, and I think that's why a lot of you are here. But what if we were each to continue growing our capacity to embody and embrace beloved community? Now, many of you say, we're already welcoming to all. And that's true, our aspirations are. But your heart may break to hear that even though we aim to be that welcoming and inclusive, we aren't always. We're human, after all. We don't consistently make room in our hearts for those who are different from us. And when I say we or us, I mean all of us here at Chalice and all of us present here today. We may inadvertently judge or hurt others or say things considered microaggressions that may offend. And of course we don't mean to do that, because I know us to be kind and caring people, but we do, simply because we're human and we don't know better. Have you ever done or said something that when you look back in hindsight, you wished you hadn't and if only you could take it back? I have. I make small judgments about others every day, about ways of being that are foreign to me, based simply on the way I've been acculturated. I have to unlearn those habits to open my heart further, and I have to stretch to understand those who have very different viewpoints from me, and also become aware of my thinking. My beloveds, the process of changing the world starts with us, but it's not about us. As Dr. Bernice King, Martin Luther King's daughter, said in the summit, we have to have a pure, honest, congruent vessel to tackle what threatens us. MLK worked on himself continuously so he could be an effective vessel. And like all of us, he wasn't a perfect person, but he worked on it daily. Becoming more conscious of our own wounding and biases gives us a greater capacity to have compassion for another. Now, some of you have asked me, why this continual focus on anti-racism work when there's so many other troubles in this world? We're wrestling with COVID, with poverty, with climate change and women's rights, not to mention just trying to keep food on the table and balance our mental and physical health. Why come to church and talk about racism, you've asked? I need a place for spiritual nourishment. I need rejuvenation and inspiration. Of course you do. And talking about race in services makes me feel guilty or sad or ashamed and doesn't feel very spiritually nourishing right now, some of you have said. My beloveds, I hear your call for spiritual nourishment. I do. I hear your desire to be fed at a soul level during these challenging times. That's really important to me too. And it's important that you get that from this community. And I would say that this work of opening our hearts to those who are different, is perhaps some of the deepest spiritual work we can do. Now, it may not feel fun or rejuvenating in the moment, but it leads to deeper connection and a sense of inner wholeness and congruence. And that in turn leads to greater inner and outer peace. This work of learning to understand those of different skin colors, ethnicities, and cultures without making assumptions and stereotyping is some of the most profound work that we can do in our lives. We've all been raised with unconscious biases that prevent us from truly seeing the miracle of another human being. So what better place to learn and practice how to transform these prejudices than in our spiritual community? We can grow and evolve together. We can get closer to one another through this work and feel united by our common humanity. Our hearts expand and our capacity to love increases through this work. Last fall, our Chalice board, as part of our fellowship's goals, commissioned a group of congregants to start exploring whether it made sense to bring the proposed UUA 8th principle to our congregation. And the 8th principle reads, "We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions." Now, as most of you know, we currently have 7 principles in Unitarian Universalism that have united us in shared values for the past 35 years or so. Since our religious tradition prides itself on constantly evolving over time as we learn and grow, we as a faith are currently in the throes of rewriting those 7 principles. And recommendations for our new principles will be presented at this coming General Assembly in June this year. Now, last year's General Assembly committed to including the spirit of the 8th principle in those revised principles. So as our task force reflected on what the spirit of the 8th principle called us to do, they realized it's actually all about building the beloved community right here. So the 8th principle task force pivoted, refocused, and renamed themselves the Building Beloved Community Advocates, or BBCA for short, because we love our acronyms. So now we have a team of advocates in our congregation whose main purpose and pleasure is to support and help Chalice build the beloved community right here. And I want to share the BBCA's vision and mission with you because I think it's really inspiring. Their vision is to make love visible in all that we say and do. Let me say that again. Make love visible in all that we say and do. You might even want to say that yourself. Make love visible in all that we say and do. And their mission is, we, the members of the Building Beloved Community Advocates, aim to nurture the conditions to foster a diverse, multicultural fellowship that values the inherent worth of every human through congregational discussions, resources, support, and actions that work toward dismantling racism and other oppressions. We advocate for an interdependent relationship of love and mutual respect among all. We serve as a haven and brave space for members' questions, conversations, and vulnerabilities about how to be a beloved community within Chalice and beyond. Isn't that beautiful? My beloveds, we have our very own team at Chalice to help guide us in this work of becoming more loving, to make love visible in all that we say and do. How amazing is that? The team currently consists of today's worship associate, our beloved Matt Chapa, as well as Randall Edwards, Katie Morgan, Ayana Gaines, Ani Barker, Rick Wells, Kelly Nevergall, Nancy Cooper, and Clint Foltz. And they're going to share more about their work and what they intend to do to support us at our congregational meeting in 2 weeks, which I invite you all to join us for after the service in 2 weeks. Meanwhile, I want to take a risk right now and talk to you about something that I know has been difficult for many of you, and me too, understandably. And that's the term that's used currently throughout anti-racism work these days, the term white supremacy culture. It's especially uncomfortable in light of the resurgence of white supremacy in our nation and last year's insurrection. And hearing that we may all be a part of white supremacy culture because it's part of this nation's founding can lead us to feel defensive, ashamed, and resistant. And that's understandable. I know most of us are trying to be more loving and anti-racist each day and in no way resemble white supremacists. And most, if not all of us, consider ourselves not racist. But for whatever reason, this term, white supremacy culture, has come into common parlance to express our American culture and institutions in which having white skin has been an advantage for over 400 years now. And we need only examine our history to see that that's true. The ruling elites in the 1600s cleverly categorized people by skin color in order to divide them and stop them from being powerful as a collective. And that was so effective that the social construct of race, of racialized identity, still exists today. But we're actually all just humans who have different skin colors, cultures, and backgrounds. There is no physical or DNA evidence for race. Biologically, there's only one race, the human race. Yet in American society and many places in the world, people with lighter skin have enjoyed benefits over those with darker skin, and hence the name supremacy, considering white skin better than black or brown skin. But my friends, if this term irks you and stops you from engaging in learning and dialogue around this issue, I invite you to translate it to something like white dominant culture or white favored or white biased culture. I beg you not to throw out all this important work because of this one term. Just like many of you who are atheists translate the word God when you hear it because it doesn't resonate for you to something like love or inner wisdom, I invite you to translate the term white supremacy culture to something more palatable for you, like dominant culture or white advantage. I encourage us not to get hung up on semantics, but rather do the work required to build beloved community. That is our spiritual task, after all, and it's a huge one, because this open-heartedness is so counter-cultural. And remember, all religions ask this of us too, to love the stranger as yourself. Now, of course, there's fear among some lighter-skinned people that the life and privileges they've enjoyed will no longer exist if they lift up people of color. And our politicians are presenting it in a way to make people afraid. This creates resistance and pushback to progress being made, like the current backlash around critical race theory and the growing hate crimes. But this idea of a zero-sum game is an illusion. Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. called us to envision an America without racism. When things get better for one, they get better for all, he reminded us. A rising tide lifts all boats, says the ancient phrase. We all rise together because we're all connected and invested in our communities. And our first and seventh principles remind us of the inherent worth and dignity of all and that we're all interconnected. So we can never be free and truly joyous until we are all free. And our Universalist history teaches us that. The old zero-sum paradigm is not just counterproductive, it's a lie, writes Heather McGhee in her new work, The Sum of Us, What Racism Costs Everyone and How We Can Prosper Together. To this day, she says, the wealthy and powerful are still selling the zero-sum story for their own profit, hoping to keep people with much in common from making common cause with one another. But not everyone is buying it, she writes. McGee explains that when she found cross-racial solidarity, it led to better conditions for everyone, from higher wages to cleaner air made possible through collective action. And also she says there's a psychic and emotional cost to the tightrope white people walk, clutching their identity as good people. When all around them is suffering, they don't know how to stop. But that is done, it seems, in their name and for their benefit. The forces of division seek to harden this guilt into racial resentment. But I met people who had been liberated by facing the truth and working toward racial healing in their communities, McGee writes. My friends, the truth can liberate us, and we can be liberated by doing this work. We can be rejuvenated and nourished and made whole by doing this work. Remember, when others are lifted up, we are all lifted up. And our struggle with COVID shows us our interconnectedness, our interrelatedness. We need care for more than just ourselves, as everyone is impacted by this virus. Our choices affect so many, like our stones showed when they dropped in the water and the ripples came out. If one of us unknowingly infects another, it spreads like wildfire, which is particularly evident right now with Omicron. And so it is with our thoughts and actions. Our individual actions affect us all. So, my beloveds, will you join us in building the beloved community? We must all learn to live together as brothers or people, or we will all perish together as fools, Martin Luther King said in 1968. We are tied together in the single garment of destiny, caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, and whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. I can never be what I ought to be until you are what you ought to be. And you can never be what you ought to be until I am what I ought to be. This is the way God's universe is made, King reminds us. My beloveds, as we honor the great Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. this weekend, may we indeed learn to live together more lovingly as people. May we begin by understanding our own barriers to love, and as our hearts open, share compassion and kindness around the world. May we make love visible in all we say and do. And may we together answer the call of love. Amen.